All right, so we're live. So welcome to another Run Wild with Us. Ask us anything. I'm Lisa Kastner. I am the founder and executive editor of Running Wild and RIZE Presses, and I'm here with you along with several, or at least a couple, typically, of our wonderful, amazing editors on Thursdays between 5 and 6 p.m. Pacific time, 8 and 9 p.m. Eastern time. And we are here to answer any questions that you may have. It can be about publishing, creative writing, the process of writing it, whatever it is that you want. If my hair color is truly red, hey, whatever. So all you have to do is for that a question that you'd like to pose, go ahead and go to the comments section of this fabulous forum and go ahead, type in your said question. I will then repeat the question, and then whomever it is that is present during this live stream will have an opportunity to respond. Now, if you are tuning in and it is not Thursday between 5 and 6 p.m. Pacific time or 8 and 9 p.m. Eastern time, that is not a big deal. All you have to do is go ahead and pop those questions again into the comments section, and we will be more than happy to respond to your questions in the next session. So, with that, I see Caroline says, "Good evening, dear. Good evening. It's so wonderful to see you as always. You're absolutely fabulous." Rod says, "A happy hello to you." Hey, Rod. Fabulous to see you as well. For those of you who may not be familiar, so Caroline is actually one of our amazing authors. And Rod has been very generous and invited several of our authors to speak on his Relax and Chat uh, program. And actually, I will be meeting with Rod on Monday of next week, and we are going to record a couple of sessions. So hopefully, you guys will find our conversation to be valuable or at least entertaining, if not valuable. And I'm really looking forward to that. Rod is actually a really, really awesome guy. And he started off with our own Ben, who has just joined us. Hey, Ben, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, young man. How has your week been so far?
It's been good. I'm about to send you a novel ready for production.
Woohoo! Check you out.
Yeah, I know.
Very fancy. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the novel?
It was the map of my escape.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I always wanted to say map of her escape, but it's my escape.
Okay.
And author is Cheryl Reed. Very nice job. And she took her time, and we got it right. That's
Very
always
cool.
good.
That's always cool. Yeah, and that is actually something, it's funny. One of the biggest questions that we get is when, okay, so you've acquired our book. When is it going to be published? And I'm like, when are you going to finish working on it with your editor? One thing that I think does make us a little bit different is, we really do focus on that collaboration between the author and the editor to make sure that the story is the absolute best that it can be. So sometimes that means the editing process is a month. And in a few very rare cases, it may be a couple of years. So, guys, don't panic if you're watching this and you're like, oh my God, I just signed up with Running Wild and she said a couple of years. Holy crap. Yeah, admittedly, a couple of years. But again, it's in agreement that both the author and the editor are in agreement that they were going to continue working on it for that length of time. So please don't panic on that. The average is actually closer to 4 to 6 months for a full length work in terms of the editing process. For a short story anthology or a novella anthology, it's a little bit different, just because we're working with several authors for a single title. And, like right now, I'm working on the novella anthology. I have two left to go for a first round of reviews. And it really is dependent on, several factors. But you know, after that first round, each author, it may be a little bit different in terms of where we are in terms of it being finalized. So some, I mean, the story's so clean after the very first round, it's just like boom, it's done, right? And some, you go back and when you're reviewing it, you realize, oh, there's something that maybe we can improve on or tweak. For me personally, it's very rare that what we do more than 2 rounds, especially with a short story or a novella. If you do more than 2 rounds of reviews for a full-length work, usually it's really focused on a specific section. I don't know, how about you, Ben? What have you
Yeah,
found?
I would agree with that. It's I'll go through it and make suggestions, and when I get about halfway through, I'll invite the author to start following me through to see those suggestions, and then I'll stay half a novel ahead,
Mm,
and then as they finish up, I will have gone through, started the second time through to see what they've done, and then by that time it's pretty much polished. There's like I say, like you say, if it goes back for a third time through, it's a basic section. Like this, the novel we just finished, she had a scene that it, included the Coast Guard, and I think she saw it on one of my emails. She said, "Oh, I didn't know you were in the Coast Guard. How does my Coast Guard section sound?"
oh.
And we went back and I gave her some ideas about what from the Coast Guard perspective, what they would have been doing on scene, and not just from the perspective of the people on her boat. But in one way, the layman terms that she was using for the Coast Guard was very realistic, because a lot of people
Mm,
don't know, and
mm,
they just see a white boat or an orange helicopter and say, okay, the Coast Guard was there. But
mm.
we beefed that up in the third time through.
Oh, nice. Cool.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm excited to check out this, the final version. It sounds awesome. Mm,
yeah, and then another thing to add for authors turning those things in, once that editing is done, there's still the third person bio. There's still blurbs to ask for. There's still comp titles for the marketing aspects of it. Uh, and then cover design. Cover design is kind of exciting though. That's once you get the cover back and say, yeah, that's the one I like and that fits my ideas. That's kind of exciting.
mm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, because it's almost like it makes it visually real.
Yes.
Even if the cover's not, to me, the covers should be something that's eye-catching and it's indicative of the story, but it doesn't have to be indicative of the whole story. In a lot of cases, that would be impossible, right? Like,
Sure.
including, like, if you look at the behind me is the cover for Cure, right? Which Ben was my cohort in crime for that. And this isn't indicative of the entire story. It just more so is a physical representation of what the story's about, right? At its core. So, and that's really, in my opinion, all a cover should be. It's something that's eye catching, it gets people's attention, and it brings them in, it draws them in. But it doesn't have to be like, like if it starts off at a party, it doesn't have to be the cover, it doesn't have to be a party.
Right.
And like with anthologies, we typically go with something kind of generic. Although I was actually thinking about us this morning playing with the cover idea and asking each author, like, if you had one visual that represented your story, what would it be? Right. And then going back to our cover designer and seeing if he could create, remember Hollywood squares where each guy was in a box, right? So like that kind of concept where each square represents a story within the anthology. And then that way everyone kind of you get like a little flavor. So if someone is interested in, something more horror-ish, right? Then maybe there's like, I don't know, like fingers going like this or something. I have no idea, right? Um, but so that you kind of get a feel for it and the eclectic nature of the anthology.
Yeah.
So I don't know, just something I was thinking about.
Well, that's a good
Probably
idea.
because I'm almost done the novella,
Yeah.
the first round of
How
novellas.
many novellas do you have? In the,
Let me see. 4. the hold on. Oh, okay. For the Running Wild, I have one, two, three, four, five, six, seven novellas. And then for Rise, I think it's four. I'm just double checking. Yeah, it's four.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Um,
nothing overwhelming on the cover because I can see the limit to
mhm.
your idea would be too many novellas or short stories.
Yeah, that's a good
But
point. Well, and
that's manageable. Seven would be a two by four.
mhm. Yeah, and then and what would it may end up being because as you know, us our novellas sometimes run a little bit long, not long, but we end up having book one and book two.
Yeah.
So it may end up being like three novellas in one and two in another or something like that. So, we just have to see how it kind of grows.
Yes.
So, Rod Gilly asks, are you getting many submissions and time is an evil beast? I could recommend a couple editors I've gotten to know. Would you like me to have them contact you? Hey, Rod, we're always open to, talking to new potential editors. Um, Caveat is that everybody, no matter who they are, has to take. We have a standard test. Poor Ben went through it several years ago, but it's to get a feel for the person's editing style and like what they kind of focus on, so that we know we get we get a sense of if they would be a good fit with Running Wild. So, and
It's a
Rod,
tough test.
yeah, it's so hard. It's awful.
It's basically a conversation with Lisa, but you better have the right answers.
Now this sounds like it's like your SATs, which
Yes.
maybe more like the essays, more like your Harvard admission school essay,
Yeah.
where you're like, I'm not sure what the right answer is, but I'm just gonna throw this out here. So, Caroline says, "Do you make the decisions on the cover with the author?" Uh, Not typically. What happens is the I mean, we've used the same cover designer for like 5 years now, and I really think that his style has become really representative of Running Wild and Rise in general. And so typically, what happens is we will we'll send the cover concepts to our designer. He'll come back with two or three ideas based on the different concepts. And the concepts are usually either a brainstorm between the author and the editor, or, maybe it's a concept the author's played with a little bit, and then our product manager will bring it back to the author and include like me and sometimes the editor. Again, it depends on if the editor, if the author wants the editor engaged in that process. And then sometimes the author will decide, will be out of the loop from there, right? Just says, hey, I prefer this one. And then we run with it. And sometimes the author is engaged a lot more, like and every once in a while I'll chime in more so because and I'm involved, meaning like I'm included in all of the email chains, but typically I don't really chime in unless we're really kind of going around in circles, right? um and it's just not productive, so I kind of have to jump in and kind of force a decision. um but again, that's
I
not
think that's
frequent.
rare, based on my experience. That going around in circles is really rare.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I mean, honestly, I think oftentimes when we end up going around in circles, it's because um the author has a lot of different visions in their head, and they're kind of like jumping from one thing to another and then back and then another, and then they go off to their cousin and say, "What do you think?" And the cousin comes back and says, "Well, I think something completely different." And then we start all over, right? And it's like, "No, no, that's not what this is for." So, Rod says, I create a visual for every story I write, even flash fiction. It helps me connect. Cool. That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Caroline says, do you use the major time of the book for the
I think
cover?
the theme
I think
there
that
with
should
the
be theme, but yeah. I don't know, Ben, what do you
We
think?
only use time for a cookbook.
Yeah, pretty much we only use time, THYME, for cookbook. Um, again, it goes back to, we do try to have it where it's more around whatever the major theme is, or if it's an image, again, it's just an image that kind of runs in parallel with the overall stories, not just theme, but like what the feel is of the story. So like if it's more horror, then it'll be a bit darker of a theme. If it's something that's more fun, like Shocking Pink is kind of like a which Ben edited, like a very fun, I'm gonna say like sarcastic tone on the adult entertainment industry. So uh the cover kind of gives you that feeling. um yeah, I'll
With
just
the
leave it there.
predominant colors being shocking pink, of course, because that's the name of the book. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. I think that was where my input ended. Whatever you decide, the title's got to be in shocking pink.
Yeah,
You take
yeah,
it from there.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, yeah, like I said, like we've had authors who were just like so confused. They were like, I don't know what to do. Oh my God. And I'm like, okay, go back to your editor and ask them their thoughts, because next to you, your editor is probably the next the person who has read the most recent version the most and has the best understanding of what you are trying to achieve within that story. So Rod says, a subject came up earlier that I'm not familiar with. Perhaps you can help. My work in progress novel is a paranormal thriller. Working title and subtitle Kane, Book One of The Tailor's Apprentice. Okay. I'm assuming there's going to be more to this, so I'm just waiting for. Would it be a good idea to drop the subtitle and replace it with a tagline? Rod, how are you defining a subtitle and how are you defining a tagline? Now, I asked that. And by the way, I'm infamous for asking questions like this, and some people get really annoyed by it. But the reason I ask is because I found oftentimes with things like this, it also came up recently, like, what's the difference between a table of contents and an index? At the root, a table of contents and an index are basically the same thing, right? It's a listing of specific titles associated with specific, I'm sorry, not titles, specific subjects within the story. And typically a table of contents is more so listed based on the chapter headings, or and the subheadings within it. And typically an index is more so around topics that are considered to be significant within the story itself, right? And the index is also typically found at the end of a book. Table of contents is typically at the beginning of a book. So again, depending on who if you're talking to someone who's purely technical, they're going to sit down and say, oh, well, it's the same thing, because from a technical perspective, when you're actually trying to create a table of contents or create an index, you're using the same software. And again, a lot of times it's repetitive. The table of contents, elements of the table of contents will be in the index, and the index, but and elements of the index will be in the table of contents, but the index will be much more detailed, if that makes sense. And you also typically won't find an index in anything other than academic works. And you also don't typically find an index in ebooks. You only find it in paperback or hardback because of the variability of the page numbers. Again, unless it's hot linked. And if you're too young to know what a hot link is, just message me and I'll tell you what a hot link is. I don't know, Ben. Do you have anything to add to that, or?
Not on the technical side. It's a preference side. And actually, I just had this discussion with the novel I'm editing now.
Mm,
Um, the author had a table of contents, but it really wasn't necessary because it kind of got in the way of the story. No, I don't think a reader's going to look. He had dates
Mm,
for the headings of each chapter, and
mhm,
so in his table of contents, he had the dates and then what page they were on. And I asked him, "Do you want your reader to read through this in a linear fashion?" And he said, well, "Of course, that's the way the story unfolds." Well, then why give them an option to go to January 14th, 1985 on page 95 when you
mm,
don't want them doing that anyway? So let's take it out. So
mm.
we took out the table of contents in that point. And so
That's a good.
it came down to just the linear reading of the story
Mm,
that he wanted to unfold in a certain way.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Oh,
now a collection of short stories, sure, because they're different. They're separate.
mhm.
So a title of a story may catch somebody's attention right away, and they want to read that first, and that's okay. Read them in reverse.
Mm,
Just now that you've got the book, you can read it any way you want to.
mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Rod says, subtitle to the best of my knowledge, a hint of the storyline. I was told earlier that a tagline is 9 words of less or less to give audience a lasting impression like an ad. Oh, that's interesting. Because in my mind, they're the same damn thing. That's also why I asked. So in my opinion, a tagline or a subtitle is really intended to elaborate. It's to hook the potential reader in. And again, in my opinion, it's also because the title itself is too broad stroke, or it's not specific enough. It doesn't really epitomize the story and draw the reader in, so you need that tagline or that subtitle to pull the potential reader in. Um so like Rod, an example would be, because Cain is such a broad stroke, I don't know what we're talking about. Like, is this a biblical reference book, right? Is it purely about an essence, something in the Bible that which, or is this, so which means this could actually be an academic story, um, or is this, but if you give me what I call a tagline, um, give me something that draws me in, then I'll know from that. Um, like, I'm not sure that book one of the Tailor's Apprentice actually tells me anything, other than that this is a series. Because I don't, to me, that means that the Tailor's Apprentice is actually the title of the book, not Cain. Um, like, you could literally name this Cain, the Tailor's Apprentice, book one, or something like that. Again, though, I might be a little confused because I won't understand what the Tailor's Apprentice has to do with Cain, who's the most famous. Because I'm immediately going to go to Cain as the most famous Cain, that we know of in at least North America. But I don't know, Ben. What do you think?
Yeah, it's. I thought of Bob Dylan's Chronicles Volume One, and it made it sound like there was going to be a Volume Two, and there never was.
Mm,
And so you set a reader up, and you may set your readership up for a if it isn't complete yet, if the trilogy or the series isn't complete yet, you may set them up for disappointment and lose them because well, there's supposed to be more, because I've got book one and it says book one, so I'm anticipating book two, but it never comes out for whatever reason.
mm,
And so you've set up the reader for disappointment. And but Lisa's right with Cain, and actually Rod and I have talked about this. I've read a little bit of it, and it's there's such a heavy biblical reference that comes with and it's been done throughout literature, the mark of Cain and the journey of Cain, or whatever, Cain in the circus.
mm,
But so you have to be very careful about using that title as the draw.
mm,
And but book one of the Tailor's Apprentice, I would just say that's uh it it may be both a tagline and a subtitle,
mm,
like Lisa's saying, but it's really at the point where if there's not a series, it may not be as strong for either one that you want it to be,
Mm-hmm.
to draw people in or to get their interest either way, or to describe the as a subtitle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I totally agree. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Um, Actually, it's interesting. We got a different on the side. I got a question from an author that we're publishing later this year. Um, Sorry, my ear was itching. And the author did some research and found out they live in New York, and they found out that they could do we could do a side of the bus ad for like $5,000, right? Between 5,000 and 10,000, depending on, I guess, the neighborhoods you're going through, right? And so she wanted to know if this was a good idea. And ironically or interestingly, I was actually just talking to some friends of mine who are also entrepreneurs, but in different industries, and they had recently done some research on this about, like, so what's the real benefit of doing those side bus ads, or, like, the big billboards, and you'll see, like, at least here in LA, there's a ton of them that say, legal advice, will help you sue, or whatever. Which I just find, like, why do you? And it's always some old white guy who looks like, and I'm like, I don't know how this is supposed to be. Like, I'm supposed to be enticed by this, but yeah, sure. Um, and what the response was when we asked around from people who have actually used those, like, side of the bus ads or billboard ads, was that the purpose for that isn't actually for sales. The purpose of it is more brand recognition, and their expectation when they use those, it's not so much, again, that they're going to increase sales, but it's that the next time they have a buddy who has some kind of, like, legal issue, again, just because I just referenced it, um, then they'll think of that lawyer, right, who had the billboard ad, and reach out to them, and then it'll go from there. So it's not, I mean, if all you're looking for is brand recognition within your immediate area, then it's, the billboard's probably a good idea. But if you're actually looking at it to be an opportunity for you to increase sales, or maybe to advertise a specific event or something like that, it may not be the best idea. So Caroline says, what do you look for in titles? Is it a matter of how well it represents the book? I don't know, Ben, what are your thoughts?
I think it actually is a type of hook. What an interesting title that is. Sometimes we'll see a line, and in the novel or in the introduction from the author, and it'll be such a great line. I said that should be the title right there. That's what they want to use.
Mm.
And but it's, I'm thinking of Heather Finch was the main character, so she got the title. The Faith Machine was it was all about the faith machine, and what kind of machine is a faith machine? So it's got a piques of curiosity. Legendary was no, actually Legendary was kind of different. It didn't necessarily represent the book, except the characters were on a journey, and one of them's name was Arthur. And so the cover in that case, it became like a knight or a suit of armor behind the title. So it drew you in with legend, knights, and then surprised you that it was in the 50s, set in the 1950s. So, but it still worked together. It still came together nicely. But it was just three different things that merged into the idea of the book, which made the title interesting and still work. But some others, I think there's still a connection to the story and what it's about, like the map of her escape was she escaped. And I'm thinking of White Oaks was the name of the institution where the story took place, so that made sense. So there should be a connection and some sense making in the title.
Yeah.
but it plays many. It's a layered tool to get readers' interests.
Yeah. No, I agree. And honestly, Carolyn, I wouldn't sweat the title when you're submitting a book or a story to a publisher, because a lot of times the title changes. To Ben's point, the deeper that the author gets into the story and the more they collaborate with their editor, sometimes they'll come forward and realize like, oh, this isn't quite performing what I wanted it to be doing. So like so to Ben's point, Suzanne Samples' Frontal Matter was originally called, I believe it was Frontal Matter. And when we were going through the editing process, or rather Barbara Lockwood, the fantastic editor of Suzanne's books, they were going through that process. Barbara and I were brainstorming, and I was like, I don't know that Frontal Matter is going to do it. Like, people won't understand what this has to do with anything. And we really want something that because it's a memoir, and it's in some ways dark because it's about having brain cancer and being diagnosed with brain cancer. But she was also so incredibly funny, and but yet really honest in her storytelling, that we really wanted a title that would bring that forward, right? Versus like, help, I have brain cancer, right? That probably it would not be indicative of who Suzanne was, and the story itself. So we were talking about Barbara's favorite lines in Frontal Matter, and when she said, oh, glue gone wild, and I was like, that's it. That's the tagline, right? It's got to be Frontal Matter, glue gone wild, because that's really what brain cancer is. Go look it up, and you'll see. But and that's when it was like, that is such a great way of really epitomizing the overall story itself, and giving people a taste of what it's actually about, right? Like, that kind of title, it makes you say, all right, I want to read the back jacket copy. I want to find out what the story is really about. So, we really look for it. It's that kind of thing that we're looking for. And again, it really does. It doesn't necessarily have to really, quote unquote, represent the book. Like, Shocking Pink doesn't tell you anything, but it does make you say, well, I'm kind of curious. What do we mean? What do we mean by Shocking Pink? Right? Yeah. It's like in your face. So as soon as you read the back jacket copy, you go, oh, so this is a double entendre. Got it. All right, sure. I'll check this out. This sounds kind of fun. So yeah, so it's kind of a little bit of everything. And again, you try and avoid things that are it's too iconic. In all honesty, like, I would avoid having the title name Cain, or be Cain. It would be like naming it Jesus, right? Because, man, who knows what the story is gonna be about. And people will immediately assume that it's biblical, even if it's about Jesus who lives down the street, right? Um, you just I'm just saying, right? I personally would avoid stuff like that. But on the other hand, now I'm trying to remember. Like, Dance Among the Flames was originally named after the religion that the story is based in, and now I can't. Anyway, or it's not only about that, obviously, right? It's a very lovely and amazing and dark and fantastic and passionate, complex book. And myself and the agent who represents the amazing author Tori Eldridge, we basically had a coming to Jesus meeting with Tori, and said, the title's really interesting, and we know that what the title is about, but no one else is going to know what the hell this means. And at first, Tori was like, it's obvious, right? It's about this. And it's like, well, you know, do me a favor, go and take that title and go to your friends and ask them what they think it means and what the story's about. And then she came back and said, all right, yeah, okay, fine, I get it. Like, let's look at what other titles might be better, a better representation of more of like the spirit in that case of the story, right? Because Dance Among the Flames, there's nobody dancing around in a fire pit. At least I don't think there is. Not that I remember. But there is, I mean, it gives you the reference of evil and, the devil, and, kind of, walking the barriers, right? And sort of trying to balance dance among that darkness, right? And instead of saying like dance among the darkness, dance among the flames, when you think of flames, it gives you this very bright, chaotic visual in your head, right? So that ended up being, perfect for the novel itself. So so
Also,
yeah,
if
go ahead.
Rod is still with us, it's it's interesting to give the title to the antagonist,
Mm,
where the protagonist usually is the one. Taylor's Apprentice may be a great title, but
mhm,
to highlight the protagonist, this is the one you're going to care about. The antagonist rarely gets the sympathy or the interest or the champion. Yeah, let's go champion the evil guy, and, which would be an interesting story if you could pull it off. But uh, and maybe some characters do, but I think you can go. And one thing you want to make sure, and I hated this. I had a novel called The Kill Gene,
mm,
and I thought it was so new and fresh and novel. And then on Amazon, if you pull up The Kill Gene, so many other books come up called The Kill Gene or some reference to The Kill Gene, and how disappointing that is. But so do that while you're thinking of a title. Go to Amazon and just type in your title and see what comes up. See if it's been used.
mm,
And there's no copyright infringement for a title, of course, but you still want to know, well, if people are looking for my book, they're going to find that book. So I just help some other author out, and I'm sure the other author would appreciate it. So yeah, go ahead. But it's the more unique and the more apart you can set your novel, the better. Because I think Catch 22 was a really stupid working title. I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't Catch 22. And now you think, well, Catch 22 is what else would you call it? It had to be
mhm,
Catch 22.
mhm. Well, yeah, now, I mean, it's pretty iconic at this juncture,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
you can't, yeah, to your point, there's nothing else that it could have been. So, yeah. Um, it is interesting. I mean, I think some authors think they have to have everything nailed down, including like the title and all that when they submit a book. And man, just focus on writing a fabulous story, right? I mean, and doing, everything that you can to make it a fabulous story. And don't worry about things like title and all that, right? You'll that all that'll be figured out. We've actually had books submitted to us that it had no title, and but the story was great, right? So we were like, all right, this actually sounds pretty fabulous. We'll figure out, along with the author, and it's all, that's great. Nothing wrong with that.
And actually, Caroline, I changed the title of your short story, so it happens. And the I can't remember what it was called before we changed it, but it's great now.
Mm.
It's a super title now.
It is. It is a super title. Absolutely. Actually, Ben, to your point about the whole like book one, book two, I had never thought about that before, but that's a really great point because I think a lot of times, well, in genre acquisition, they may pub they may acquire like, let's say, three books in a series, right? Because it's a mystery series, and you know that this whoever the protagonist is gonna solve at least three crimes, or a thriller series where the guy's kicking butt for at least three books before his own hiney gets kicked, right? And but you don't, unless you already know that that's been mapped out, right? Because typically when it is a three-book deal, they at least provide the concepts for each story. It may not be written already, but the proposal is one that includes like books two and three typically. So it's probably safer if you don't have everything figured out to just to not have an inference that it's one of whatever. That said, plenty of books go on and are a part of a series, but you may not know it because the titles aren't, they don't reference the other stories. Like the Wizard of Oz actually has a whole series of books that were written. I mean, not by the same author. I actually love the books personally, but but I think really kind of diehard fans would know that they are. So yeah. Let's see. Don McIntyre says, "What type of book do you like to take on vacation?" I'm gonna punt to Ben. What do you like?
What's a vacation?
I know, right? People
Um,
do that still?
I've got a wide range of books, and before vacation, I'll have two or three that are being read at the same time, and it's it could be a poetry book or a novel or a history book, but to actually go on vacation would probably be either an author I know, a fiction author that I know, or something that caught my eye. Talking, whether it was the cover or the title, and uh, and take that with me as looking for a good story and
Mhm.
something that I can read on the plane, and because that's where you I don't know it's the altitude or something, but I read better at 35,000 feet.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, pay
Uh,
attention to where you read well.
I was gonna say it's because you're forced to, right? You don't have all
Yeah.
those additional distractions. Um, so what do I look for? It honestly, when I was younger, I would go through phases. So I went through an erotica phase, I went through a thriller phase, I went through a mystery phase. I think I read all of Agatha Christie's. I probably read, I don't know. I just like, I went through a magical realism phase. I went through a hardcore literary phase. Um, Now, honestly, it's more so just based on either books that friends of mine have given me, and I want to knock out. Like, I want to, obviously, I want to read them, and or I literally have one, two, three, four stacks of books on my bedside table right now. So, it's basically it'll be based on what books are on my bedside table and that where I am in finishing the last one. So, I usually whatever book it is that I'm reading before bed um is the one that I'm gonna take with me on vacation because I want to finish it before I start my next one. So that was a very boring answer, but oh well.
But it lends itself to as a reminder that one book by an author that's new to you will advertise for another book by the same author. So think about
Mhm,
the books that are written that you've written as being the marketing tools for the other books that you've written. And
mhm,
you dig down like Agatha Christie. Once you see I like her work, what's next? What else did she? Let me see by the same author. Let me see what I would like to read next. What title jumps out? And it there's there's a series of well, not a series, but it's different books written by an author I found in the discount rack at Barnes and Noble, which is a
mhm,
great place to buy books because they're
mhm. I love
cheap
that rack.
and and you find some good stuff there.
It's funny, that reminded me, I just read an article by a book marketer, like who works for a large one of the larger publishers, and she had commented that you need to think of, like, if you're a new author and you are all about, like, oh my gosh, I want to have huge sales, right? I'm going to have this incredible debut. The reality is that you need to consider all the work that you do for your first and second book as primers for the sales for your third book. And the reason for that is the books that actually sell really well, it's because that author has a following, and you don't get a following until you have at least your first and typically your second book as well. And then what happens is people then go back and say, "Oh wow, I really love book 3. I want to go and check out book 1 and book 2 because I bet you those are pretty fabulous." And I mean, when I was reading this, I was like, "Holy crap, that's exactly how I behave." So,
Yeah.
Rod says, "If I may suggest a neat travel book, The Hero, the Fear, and the Date." Oh, that's kind of sounds like kind of fun. Caroline asks, "Do either of you love to write on planes, traveling, or in restaurants?"
I've written in all three, but um, one place that I really like to write is behind the steering wheel.
No, you
Not
don't.
driving down the road, but when you're still sitting there in the parking lot. But
Mm.
that comes from uh, being from Kentucky, but going to school in New Mexico in Albuquerque. I-40 was at one time I-40 was my girlfriend, and which is a great title. When I-40 was my girlfriend,
Mhm.
and it is a title on a collection I have, but it captures a lot of thoughts that you have driving, 36 hours to get someplace. And I think that's why I like looking at the dashboard and the steering wheel through the windshield and as a motivating place to write.
Mm.
But that's not the only place. On the couch in front of the TV works too.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I honestly, so it depends on where I am in my writing process. So if I am, uh, a lot of times, if I'm like first starting out on a book, I might be rewriting the opening of it, like whatever it was that inspired me in my head. And then if it's something where it's really complex, so if I'm figuring out like the narrative structure for a novel and I want to change certain aspects of it, I might write down like, what notes to myself associated with that. And that could be anywhere, Caroline, to your point, on a plane, when I'm traveling, or in restaurants. But when I'm actually writing, unless it's like a flash fiction or a short story, I actually need focused time. Like I need to be like left alone so I can just like knock out those pages. And I am actually infamous for getting a hotel room. If I know that I need to knock out uh like 40, 50, 60 pages, and I need to be left alone, to put it bluntly, I am infamous for getting a hotel room for like 4 or 5 nights, because I can write around 5,000, 6,000 words a day. But again, I need to not have distractions in order to do that effectively. And so I'll get a hotel room and I'll tell people that I'm unavailable during that time, and I'll force myself. I won't go on social media. I won't check email while I'm writing. I'll typically check email in the morning and at night, and I'll write until I hit that point. I don't know about you, Ben, but there's a point where my brain says that's enough, right? And you
Yeah.
can tell your creative juices they're maybe not killed, but you need to uh, rejuvenate in some other way. But then I actually mentally write, so I'll spend that whole day or those couple hours or whatever writing, and then the next day I will. It's like my brain uses sleep to revise or question what I had written, and come up with new ideas or different ways, approaches to things, or my brain will solve problems that I was finding in whatever it was I wrote previously. And then I'll go back and I'll work on those changes that next day. And yeah. So yes and no. If I'm on a plane or traveling or in a restaurant and I'm with friends or my significant other, I intentionally will not bring like a notepad or whatever, because I want to focus on them. Um, I made that mistake early in my life, and I would rather keep my friends and my significant other. So yeah. Mhm.
But do you shoot for a word count when you sit down, or a scene, or what, or just let it flow?
If it's a first draft, I shoot for 1,000 words a day. If it's a revision, I will have written notes to myself, like especially if I know there are major revisions. Like sometimes if I just want to knock out a first draft, I'll just knock out the first draft. So typically my first draft for full length is somewhere around 60,000. And then once it's been revised, it gets to about 80,000. And Ben knows this because the poor man's been uh he's been
I
exposed
can
to it.
only take you back to 60,000.
Well, then we revise it, and then it ends up somewhere usually between 80 and ninety
Yeah,
thousand uh, words. So yeah, I usually start with a word count, and then my revision process, it's more focused on like where I know it needs to be revised, and then I give it to readers, and when the readers come back based on their recommendations, and a lot of times, so honestly, how I typically will choose what I'm going to revise based on readers' recommendations. I don't know about you, Ben, but a lot of times someone will come back with a recommendation that I thought of during my writing process, and I was like, nah, that can't be right, or meh, let's
yeah,
see what someone else says, and if someone confirms what my gut told me, then I know it's an absolute, yep, got to do it, right? And if my gut reaction is what the hell, then I actually don't reject it immediately. I kind of sit back and try and think about like what drove that feedback. And if I can find a logical reason for it, then what's being suggested may not be the right answer, but they're trying to solve a problem that they found within the story. So I need to figure out what problem they identified, and again, is this a problem that's solved elsewhere? Or is this something where, they just didn't get it, right? And not to be
right.
rude and not to call anyone any names or anything, because I don't. But what I mean by that is I tend to write complex narratives that are from multiple points of view. And so sometimes someone will give feedback in the first chapter or where, at one point, and it's answered later on when it needs to be answered, right? And they just didn't get to that yet.
Yeah.
So,
And
Rod
I see
says,
that from the editor point of view as well. There's times when the technique that the author is using, your initial editing instinct is let's chop that out,
mm-hmm,
but then oh wait, that was on purpose, and now it makes sense because I kept reading,
mm-hmm,
and so it's a good technique. It's very effective if it's
mm-hmm.
done right.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. And sometimes the editor will come back, as the editor's role, you're going to come back and say, well, wait a minute, you know what? You need to move that up here because it's too much of a lag, right? Or, the placement of it in terms of timeline or something like that, it just, you just need to do some kind of tweaking. So, Rod says, coffee surely runs through my veins. I drink bunches of it daily. Is that common among writers? I think it's a cliche that all writers drink tons of coffee. I think it's just depends on who you are and if you like coffee. um,
You push the cliche and say, not coffee.
yeah. Caroline says, I agree, Lisa, alone time, but I found something about writing in an unfamiliar atmosphere that's compelling to write. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Um, Rod says, I can only type 40 words per minute. My characters run wild. I desperately try to keep up with them. And continues with um, Running Wild writer Maxine Fisher suggested writing away from my office, and that really helped. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it's interesting because some writers actually, and this is anybody. Like I was just talking to our marketing person, our marketing head, and we met up at a coffee shop that actually doubles as like a remote office space. And some people, they need to not be physically home. And other people have set it up so that they have a very specific office space within their home. and that is where they do all of their writing. And they it's more about the habit of writing versus like where they physically are. So it depends on what works for you, you know. So, I know, Ben, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. If it's there's a, I saw it someplace where the the wannabe writer said, "Oh, I love this house. I love this room. The light is so good. It will help my writing." And then they moved in the house and they never wrote anything. So if you're looking for that one place, that perfect place where the light is just right and the ambiance is right, you might want to rethink yourself as a writer, because like Lisa says, writing is the habit. It doesn't matter where you are, where the eyes come from, where the ideas come from. If you're ready to write them down, and whether it's notes in your phone or a notepad on the dashboard or wherever it is, that's what makes it the habitual aspects that it has. And yeah, don't look for that perfect space, because there's no such thing. The perfect space is wherever you write.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that reminds me, like when I lived in the Philadelphia area, there was a writers organization that in order for you to be considered a member, you had to have earned X amount of money in your writing. Otherwise, you weren't considered an author. You weren't considered a writer. And I really was personally offended by that. Not not because I was like, oh well, then that takes me out. It was because it just, you know, you as a creative person, right? And this is true for any creative art. You you decide who and what you are, right? You decide if you're an author. And you could be an author by, in today's world, you can be an author by publishing on Kindle, right? And just publishing short stories or novellas, or or you can be an author by simply writing whatever it is that you want to write, and maybe you only share it with friends, or maybe you don't share it at all. That's your prerogative. This is your art. Um, and you decide if you want to be more commercial. You decide if you want to submit your stories to publications. You decide if you want to write in a more commercial space. You decide if you want to write in genre. You decide if you want to write using what you may perceive to be a completely different structure that no one's ever done before. That's your decision. And, but with that decision comes the understanding, or at least I hope it does. Maybe you'll have a coming to Jesus or Jesus moment right now. But with that decision comes the understanding that, look, if you're not going to write, commercial mysteries or commercial romance or whatever, right? So something that would be considered commercially viable by the larger houses, then you're probably not going to be able to be a full time author. That's a conscious decision that you've made, okay? Whether you realize it or not. If you consciously decide that you are going, or a poet, how many New York Times bestsellers have you found that were poets? I mean, you know, and you're not, a famous person in general. I mean, what? None? At least not in modern times. So, you know, if you're writing creatively as a release, acknowledge that. And that's great and it's wonderful. And no one should ever take that away from you, right? You need to embrace that. But if you're writing with the intent of this being a job and this is your means of obtaining income, then you need to face that too. And you need to understand that you need to, with that comes uh, marketing to specific audiences, to understanding who your fans and your potential fans may be. And it comes with it the understanding that you're going to actually have to build an author brand, and you're going to have to go out and you're going to have to market your book, and you're going to have to create a fan base. And it's all the same tools it's been for the last 20 years. You have a website, you got a newsletter, Now there are more social media platforms, but it's just more social media platforms you learn how to use, right? You speak at conferences, and you make yourself available to all like the different book fairs and stuff. None of this has changed. It's the same crap it's always been. It's just that you need to understand that if you want to get picked up by a larger house, or actually by a press in general, they're going to be looking for things like this, because this is considered to be part of that. And I'm going to say this with intent. It's part of that career choice. So, just remember that. Okay. And with that incredibly lighthearted note, we have come to the end of our time.
And
I don't know, Ben,
Carolyn,
do you have like any last minute thoughts? Sorry, go ahead.
no place is the right place. If you only have one place to write, as long as you're writing, that's the key. And writers can write anywhere. Writers write anywhere, but some places have a pool, and that's absolutely correct. And find those places with the pool, and then you can say good night to Don McIntyre.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, good night, Dawn. Good night, Caroline. Good night, Rod. And good night, everyone who's joined us. And again, if you were watching this and we're not live, and you've got a question for us, just go ahead and put it in the comments section, and we will respond next week. So with that, we will see you guys later. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next Thursday. Ciao.
Good night, everyone.